the story of Cain and Abel, the creation myth, all of these things are they're so fundamental. So you can't just write them off as silly fairy tales that stupid people who didn't understand better than you did in the past kind of believed in. That you just can't. You have to contend with these stories at their own level. You have to understand, put yourself in the mindset of the people who they were intended for. Put yourself in the mindset of the people who wrote them, and then try and contend with them there.
Paul from Maniphesto, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
It's an honor to be here.
You've had me on your podcast a couple times, and I've really enjoyed both of those conversations, and you've been very gracious by giving me time to speak and get very passionate about the subjects that I get fired up about. And in that, I've recognized that I have so many questions about you and your background and what you do at Maniphesto. Of course, I've seen your content on Instagram, and I know some of the men's work stuff that you're involved in Europe, and it's sort of the sort of thing that I'm very familiar with, but I know that lots of men in America aren't. And so I've been excited to have this conversation because the work that you do is this whole side of the men's movement, which is where I come from, essentially, with the Mankind Project and stuff, this inner work kind of stuff that a lot of men don't know about. I know it's something you're very versed in and participate in a lot. So I'm excited to share some of your background and your experiences with the listeners of the podcast.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I mean, it's super interesting to see the differences between a European approach to this kind of work and an American approach. Sitting here, I live in Denmark. I've been here for the last 20 years. I'm actually born and grew up in South Africa. So I'm also a part of the New World, which I kind of see the United States as being as well. But I've really kind of immersed myself for a long time, actually saw myself like try to become Danish as much as possible.
Is that even possible?
It's not really possible here. But I did pretty well. Like people would talk to me for 2 hours and they'd be like, is there something about your accent? Like you're not completely Danish? And I would say like, yeah, I'm actually born elsewhere. But in the beginning, I refused to tell people where I was from. When they asked me where I was from, I tell them the suburb of Copenhagen that I lived in. And they'd say, no, before that. I'm like, oh, then I told them the suburb I lived in before that as well. So I try to really kind of like naturalize myself. But more and more I'm realizing that like it's interesting having a kind of meta perspective on these different things as well. And certainly talking to guys who are working in the men's movements in the United States gives a lot of value about understanding this thing of masculinity, which is yeah, at least good to have discussions about right now.
I agree. So maybe we'll start with how did you find your way into the men's movement and start doing inner work? Because we all have our experiences with that. Like I discovered the Mankind Project in, I think it would have been 2011 or 2012 in the States. Someone posted on Facebook, one of my acquaintances posted on Facebook, today I begin my new warrior training adventure. I was like on a Friday and I was like, a new warrior training adventure? That sounds like something I do. And then so I made a note of it, and I think I finally ended up doing it in 2013. And that was how I found my way into the men's movement as a whole, was through that door. How did you discover this whole world? And sort of what's your background that led you up to that?
Yeah, so the background started really with, I grew up in a good, solid, fairly conservative family in South Africa, and I would say I normally say like I got a really good operating system from my parents. Like I kind of got solid, good values and a good work ethic, discipline. I did well in school. I went to Europe to go and find my fortune when I was 18. So I wanted to go out there, but I've always done well in everything that I did and been able to reach my goals. I probably had a bit of a boyish narcissism in that it was all about me and getting stuff for myself and achieving, career, status, money, wife, house, all those kinds of things. And so, I think in some ways that's a really good thing for a young man to be focused on those things and to be getting them. So it's not really a problem. But what happened is that I also at sort of age of 21, I met a Danish woman, moved to Denmark, and got married here and kind of settled down for my life. Studied university, got a good job, worked for Microsoft, and achieved all of the goals that I thought this is what would make me happy, right? I could tick all of those boxes. I was earning more money than what I could use, and We had a beautiful big apartment in the middle of Copenhagen, the exact dream place that we dreamt of getting. And there was something that just wasn't right. And the place where it started showing up the most clearly was in my relationship with my wife. When our son was born, he's now 16 years old, so this is
I
16
had
years
no
ago.
idea you had a kid.
I have 2 kids and a third one on the way.
I had no idea. Wait, can I ask how old are you?
So I'm 41.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay, you're older than I thought you were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most people tell me that. Yeah, I do look a bit younger than I.
Yeah, I thought you were like.
So,
I thought you were like
my
23.
oldest is 16. He's just started gymnasium.
Oh wow.
Yeah. um, so yeah. When he was born, then the cracks really started showing in my relationship with my ex-wife.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
And I say ex-wife because that lasted till he was 1.5 years old, and our relationship broke. We didn't have anything to base our relationship on than 2 people trying to get their needs met with each other or something like that.
Sure.
And I've realized that just doesn't work for that kind of relationship. And so I guess that kind of like threw me out on a little bit of a spiritual search. And I felt great about it at the time. I was like, wow, yeah, I get to have like my second life, and I had a lot of money, and I was well settled, and all that kind of stuff, right? So with my work, I could go living in Thailand for 3 months, rock climbing every single day, and go do some emails and attend a video conference, and then send a big bill to one of my clients, and live that good life. And so I was doing a lot of rock climbing. I started getting into yoga as a kind of like injury prevention training for my rock climbing. And yoga kind of opened up the world to all kinds of spirituality for me as well. So some of the things that I'd really kind of pushed away from looking at and not considering really came to the fore. And a lot of it was just like total bullshit. And I had a hard time taking it seriously. But there were some things that kind of struck me in different ways. We'll see if we get more into that or not. I think right now I'll just say, like I tried out a lot of different stuff. And what I found to be by far the most valuable, that was having conversations, like deep conversations about life and existence with other men. It was far more powerful, far more moving, far more insightful to do it with men than in mixed gender environments. And, the obvious reason for that was probably because I was a single young guy who was pretty, had a high sex drive, or, pretty horny, and was attracted to a lot of women. And so like that kind of that play got into all of these kind of environments and influenced things like that. And so when I went to a men's work retreat, my first introduction to it was a guy called Eli Bjørn, who came to Denmark. This is back in 2015, I think. And I did a men's work retreat there with a couple of my best friend at the time. He was the one who kind of brought me into it. And it was a very powerful experience. And we wrestled with these guys, but we also had like deep conversations, and we realized how similar we were, and how we were kind of fighting with a lot of the same stuff, and how much we got out of just spending that quality time together and like building brotherhood. Up to that point, men were mainly like, I kind of like confided with women and competed with guys, and it wasn't like I was just like, it was playful competing. It was friendly competing, but like, we kind of competed with each other most of the time. And I went to a boys only school when I was growing up as well. So, I had good relationships with guys, but I didn't have intimacy with men. And so what I found is that you can have like emotional and intellectual intimacy, especially the intellectual intimacy was a new thing for me, where you really kind of open up your mind together with another man and really speak your heart. and that gives something very, very powerful. So at that time, I had a very good friend who was actually a philosopher in Sweden, as well as being a judge on the Swedish X Factor program or Pop Idol program.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, he's like the guy who's like really rude and abrasive to the really bad artists that come in there.
He's a philosopher?
And he's a philosopher at the same time as well. Very well known.
Does the Swedish X Factor, is that like they get up and philosophize on a microphone for like 60 seconds?
Well, he was also a very well-known pop musician before he was a philosopher.
What?
There's a band called Army of Lovers that had like a #1 hit in like the '89 or something like that.
Okay,
So he was the producer and main singer of this band, Army of Lovers.
All right, that's going to be linked in the show notes.
Yeah. I'm Crucified. That was the song.
It's a hell of a name.
It's quite heretical.
Yeah.
I guess, or something like
pop music being heretical? No way.
Yeah. Apropos, we have a shared friend called Evan who made a video called "Pop is Porn," and like, don't watch that video if you want to see pop in the same way again as you did before. Oh. It's a great video, but like it changes the way you hear pop. I think.
Oh yeah.
Which probably might be a good thing
for sure.
Yeah. Anyway, so the story continues is that me, this guy Alexander, and then we had a third friend. He was a professional dancer. We decided to put together what we called a men's research weekend, where we just invited other men in our network to come together for a weekend where I rented a venue. I kind of did the organizational stuff. I'm educated as a political scientist, but I'm like this do everything guy, jack of all trades kind of person. Mm-hmm. So I rented a venue and organized all the food and all that kind of stuff. And then we rented a venue and we didn't have an agenda of what we were going to do. So the only thing as we planned was we were going to investigate what does it mean to be a man in society today, and how do we take responsibility as men. That was also something that was like an assumption from the beginning, and that was probably one of the most powerful experiences of my life that weekend. It was beautiful and amazing and very moving.
Just the three of you?
Did it. No, we invited about 35 guys from our network, or 35 guys came. We had space for 35. Mm-hmm. So we're a big group of guys. And it was the guys, we only invited guys that we really thought had something to contribute to the conversation, like that we thought were interesting, and men who inspired us and who we felt could lift us up and teach us something. Mm-hmm. So we did that a couple of times. And then based on that, I put together a manifest, which was a text that kind of summarized most of our conversations. Mm-hmm. And when I read it today, it's a little bit fluffy, but it still has some really good stuff in there. Some very foundational, good, strong stuff. I think we're doing better today, but we put that out online, and there was just a whole lot of people who responded and said, "Hey, like this is great, and can we come and meet you guys?" And da 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 da. So back in 2017, then I booked another venue where we could have a lot more people, and we organized the first Nordic men's gathering, and we had 140 guys coming there from 35 different countries. From all over Europe, but we also had Australians and Canadians and Americans, all kinds of stuff, French, German, Baltic states, Poland, all over the place. So, and that was just like mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. And I also started realizing at that time how ill-prepared I was for that kind of work and for what I'd actually set out to do. But from there, it kind of grew, and then it went from being like a hobby to being a full-time thing. So today I'm working full-time on Maniphesto, named after that initial manifest. And the big thing that's happened recently is that me and the pop star judge guy have parted ways. Mm-hmm. We're not working.
Mm-hmm. I would like to ask, but if I can't ask why or what happened there, just out of curiosity, you could say, I decline to answer the question.
So we met at Burning Man.
Oh, wow. Like the American Burning Man?
We met at the first time we met was at the Scandinavian, the Nordic burn called Borderland.
Got it.
Probably in 2014, something like that. But yeah, we met at the Scandinavian burn.
I see where this is going.
Then the dancer guy we met I met him first time at the American burn.
Mm-hmm. When did you go to the American burn? Because that just wrapped up. We're recording on Tuesday, and that just wrapped up. American Burning Man wrapped up a couple days ago, and like embrace yourself.
So I've been the regional contact for Burning Man in Denmark for about 7 years or something like that.
Oh,
so at the time that my marriage was going to pieces, the same guy who brought me to the Eli Buren retreat, the men's work retreat, he was also very involved in the Burning Man community. He had been living in San Francisco for a very long time, and had kind of brought that whole culture back to Denmark. So him and me and a group of Swedes, we started the Burning Man festival in Denmark, the Borderland. We were like 30 people the first time, and now this year they've just bought their own land. Now they're 6,500 people.
6,500 people.
Permanent land.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's really, but it's actually small compared to some of the other places. I've also been to Africa Burn down in South Africa. There's, I think they're on 20,000-30,000 down there.
Wow.
it's a big global phenomenon. There's hundreds of burns around the world, actually, all over the place happening. You can almost be at a burn every single day of the year
Mm,
throughout the year. I think you can now. I think you can be at a burn every single day of the year.
mm.
So it's a big phenomenon and very interesting.
It's concerning.
And a big part of my journey. Not I don't go to burns at all
Yeah.
anymore. I'm not involved in the community at all anymore. But it brought me out of the flat desolation of secular culture.
Hmm. Gosh, there's so many different threads to pull on, because I can see the big shift. I can see the big shift that would have happened in your life, because it's sort of what happened to me in a way. Like you come you come from a world where you're confiding with women and competing with guys, was what you said, to discovering real male intimacy. But if you keep walking, but that usually takes place in kind of like a new age hippie kind of context, where a lot of these practices are generally like where they're cultivated, right? But what happened for me is I kept walking that path, and I found that that world has some very hard boundaries about beliefs that you're not supposed to let go of. Like, it's still very feminized. And there's
Mhm.
a land beyond that, and breaking out of that land into the world where it's like, no, you're actually like confiding with guys, and you realize that men and women, like, there's the competition aspect, everything flips around. And then, Christianity's on the other side of that road. And I can understand how that would have been a pretty major shift in your life, as it was in mine, to leave that kind
Mhm.
of world where it's like we're used to existing in this feminized context. But when you take a step forward into actual masculinity, then, a lot of things break off at that point.
And I think for a lot of people, and this is very much the case for me, Jordan Peterson was that bridge figure.
Oh, interesting.
So right at the time when we were organizing that Nordic men's gathering, as I was kind of like booking the venue, then that was when I first started watching Jordan Peterson, and that was just around the time where Bill C-16 was being debated, and all those protests were happening, and so that's when he kind of like, and I remember the very first time I saw him was very clear. Like, I kind of had this feeling like, this guy's a little bit angry. And then I carried on listening. And it's like, oh, but that was a really good point he just
Hmm.
made there. And then it's like, ping, and then another really good point. And so there was these little experiences of the world just snapping a little bit more and more into place every single time
Hmm.
that he said stuff. And like he was formulating the stuff that I already thought, but wasn't able to formulate as clearly. And he was speaking my language as well. I'm a scientist. I'm a political scientist. I'm schooled in kind of like the kind of scientific university, and so that's the way I see the world. And he spoke exactly my language, but he pointed at something that made sense and that was higher as well.
Hmm. Yeah, he spoke to it. What's so funny about Jordan Peterson is that he, at the time, was just saying things that, and this is like 2017, which is when he started, 2016, 2017, I think, is when his first album was. Um, that was like when he was just saying things that everyone kind of knew, but that everyone was kind of afraid to say. And that was like common sense in a lot of ways. Obviously not his Bible stuff. Like, once you start digging into his back catalog, his indie hits, you discover that this is a man who's a brilliant thinker, but he was the guy at the right time that stood up to the right thing in the right way. And it was like, oh, a guy's actually like doing it on the world stage. This was my perspective, because I had discovered so many things. When my perspective had begun to shift around men and masculinity out of this kind of feminized world, I think in like 2016, when I was traveling, like I went overseas. I left from the United States, and I went down to South America. And in Latin America, particularly in Colombia, where I spent a lot of time, they have very different ideas about about sex roles than we do in America. Like, there's no notion of like, oh no, men and women are the same. It's like, no, we're different, and it's awesome, and quit being a pussy. That was kind of how it is down there, because those are their expectations. And I realized I had carried all these ideas about how men were supposed to be that was absolutely not shared around the world. And that started a lot of processes. And so that sort of started this process of me stepping into myself and speaking out a bit more. And then Jordan Peterson showed up about a year later. And it was like, oh, the guy's like doing the thing. But I've heard so many stories of people like yours, where it's like Jordan Peterson was like, wait, what is this guy saying? Like, I don't want to listen to him, but I can't stop listening to him. How powerful a figure that must have been for you.
Mhm. Yeah. Right. Yeah, it was really good. I mean, there was one thing that really I would say was life changing for me. I mean, part of it was definitely his view on relationships with women,
Mm,
and him talking about marriage as a a mutual agreement you enter into where you bind yourself together very powerfully with one other person as a way of growing spiritually. And if you give yourself a back door, you will use that back door, because at some point you'll be confronted with the part of yourself that you hate or unable to face, like physically, actually, spiritually not able to face. And so it's easy to say like, oh yeah, I want to become a better person, I want to grow. But actually, when we're confronted with those things, we don't do it, right? Then we run away. And so the whole idea is like, no, you actually force yourself to stay. And that started me realizing like, oh, actually, breaking up with my wife, all those years before, I was just carrying the same issues with me all the time. That the childishness, the boyish stuff, the lack of taking responsibility, and I hadn't solved anything. I hadn't moved anywhere in my life. Actually, I was just running around having a whole lot of experiences, but nothing was actually happening. And so I came to that realization, like, wow, okay. Well, that time my wife was remarried. My ex-wife was remarried and had kids with a new guy. I was like, okay, I would have actually gone back to her at that time and said like, hey, we're going to be together. But now it's too late. Then I started realizing, well, okay, I've got to really rebuild. And then the second thing that Jordan Peterson said that really made sense was he spoke about the Bible, and he said, like, this book is over 2,000 years old. Some of the stories in it are more than 10,000 years old. It's been the foundation of our civilization for its very beginning, and it's older than any human civilizations. These stories, like the story of Cain and Abel, the creation myth. All of these things they're so fundamental. So you can't just write them off as silly fairy tales that stupid people who didn't understand better than you did in the past kind of believed in. That you just can't. You have to contend with these stories at their own level. You have to understand, put yourself in the mindset of the people who they were intended for. Put yourself in the mindset of the people who wrote them, and then try and contend with them there. And that's when you can start actually having something qualified. But I just been kind of, listening to these like atheist destroys, priest guy or something like that on YouTube, right? So it's just like, oh yeah, what a bunch of idiots, all those Christians. But when I started looking at it seriously, that got me down to like, okay, well, maybe I should sit down and start taking the Bible just a little bit more seriously. And then I was lucky to meet some good people.
Ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth, brother? Like I was never really into the like atheist destroys Christians thing, because I've always been I'd say I've always been a man of faith, but I was in the New Age world. It was like ABC, anything but Christianity. Like Christianity is the one thing. All the world religions are right except for Christianity. There's nothing. Ignore that. There's nothing in there. Or Christ consciousness, which I never really got into. I never really bought that anyway. But like it's kind of phenomenal where it's like you begin exploring the things as a man that you're told to never explore. Never explore your masculine power. Never explore Christianity. Don't ever do either of those things. They're bad. They're bad, scary, wrong. And then you start exploring them, and it's like, wait a minute, everything I've been looking for was here all along, but maybe I wasn't necessarily ready for it. Because I'll tell you, Paul, like you're telling your story of you being boyish and irresponsible, and I don't see that man in you at all. And you and I have spent a lot of time talking, on podcasts and personally, and like to hear that as part of your story, like I can't picture that version of you, which is a real testament to me of how far you must have traveled. Because normally, guys will share their past or something like that, and you get a sense like, oh, I can see that story. I don't see that in you at all, which is pretty incredible testament to the
I jumped onto the belief that you can be with multiple women at the same time, and there's no consequences to that. That love is about setting people free. That was the thing that I jumped onto. Right? So I knew no I wanted to create. Thing. Well, no, this was after my marriage ended. No wonder
what Jordan Peterson said about marriage was so impactful, because you believe that love was setting people free, and when Jordan Peterson says no, you're enslaving yourself in a way, the other way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's an idea that's very tempting for a lot of people, and especially or in some of these environments, then like people live it, and now our whole society. I just read Brave New World again recently. It's up here somewhere. And
Grim.
It's amazing. Yeah. Like I was just like, what? Like this is exactly what we're living. This is what we've created. Yeah. Like people still talk a lot about George Orwell, and but Aldous Huxley, he hit it. Like he really got it right. That's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or I think of we're living kind of in this intersection between Brave New World, 1984 and Fahrenheit 451. Like if you read those three books, it's a pretty, like we're the Venn diagram overlap of those three things. And I think Aldous Huxley was given the playbook, because Aldous Huxley, by the way, he also wrote a book called The Perennial Philosophy. And it was all about how it's the syncretic kind of thing, that all these world religions are all pointing to the one true religion. They're all different ways up the mountain. That I did believe. That there was a point in time where, all these different religions are different paths to God. But Christianity, like, that's the one for dumb people, maybe, or something like that. Not that it was false, but like Aldous Huxley also wrote that book. So yeah, I think he kind of he either had his finger on the pulse of the way things were going, or he was given the playbook. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. I think he was given a playbook. Yeah, I don't know exactly what you mean by that, but
now we're talking.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, one of the things I've been what that leads me towards is I've been following Jonathan Peugeot,
Yeah.
and Jonathan talks a lot about like spiritual entities. So like the principalities and powers, the worlds of principalities and powers, and how like we tend to kind of like woo angels and demons and turn it into like the things we've seen in movies and things like that. But actually, these are very concrete, very easy to understand terms. If you kind of look at it through the lens of the way that the people who wrote the Bible understood it as well, which is actually far more nuanced than what we realize. We think like, they were just stupid and they believed like Thor was up there making thunder by banging things together or something like that. It's like, no, that's not what people thought. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to try and repeat any of Jonathan's ideas or arguments. Although he has a great video called "Why Santa Claus Exists," because of course Santa Claus exists. Like,
I've seen him, bro.
You can, like. Exactly. And like you can write a letter to Santa Claus, and you can, like visit Santa Claus in the supermarket, and it's not like Joe sitting there, because the person who speaks for Santa Claus, like, and everybody recognizes Santa Claus when he speaks, because that's what Santa Claus, he does the kind of things that Santa Claus does and says the kind of things that Santa Claus says. So of course Santa Claus exists, and he influences the world, and it's a very big thing. He comes from an Orthodox saint, Saint Nicholas, of course, right? But like that's what our Western Christianity thing, and maybe that'll lead us a little bit towards what we're talking about, like the superficiality of, American culture has of course become world culture, because we, here in Denmark, we just swallow everything that comes through Hollywood.
I want to give you some nuance to that, but yes, I'll give you some nuance for that, but go ahead.
Some of the, I mean, our gods and goddesses are the stars, we call them stars, right? The Hollywood stars, they're the stars. Like, this is what angels and gods are. They're stars, right? So it's like, these are the exact words that the ancients also used to talk about these things, and so that's what we have as our stars now. It's Leonardo DiCaprio, whatever their name.
Well, so this ties into a bunch of different things. In my podcast a couple of weeks ago with Annalise from Feminine Not Feminist, we talked about the C.S. Lewis space trilogy, or the C.S. Lewis ransom trilogy, and the point of that series, I'm reading a book about it called Deeper Heaven by this young girl named Christiana Hale. She's part of Doug Wilson's schools up in Moscow, Idaho. And so she wrote this book, which is a reader's guide to the Ransom trilogy, and where it kind of explains why this series of books is so strange, why it would seem like, what's going on here. And what she writes about is it's an attempt to, the books, the Ransom trilogy, is an attempt to reinstantiate the medieval cosmology, the medieval Christian cosmology. How do they view the cosmos versus before the Copernican revolution? And what do we have to learn from that? And so what she's actually talking about right now, and what Lewis was talking about ultimately, was that the ancients, the medievals, they didn't conceive of stars as these burning hot balls of gas. Like, they were literally angels. Like, these planets, they were beings. They were celestial beings, and we were at the center of the cosmos, which wasn't a privileged point. The center of the cosmos was the lowest point. And as you look up into the heavens, you see the heavens, and you see the stars, and you see the angels. So when you said that stars were angels, like, yeah, that's what C.S. Lewis was writing about in this trilogy of books. So I'm really glad you mentioned that, because there is something going on right now with superstars, being held up as these almost like divine beings that, for some reason, we should care about. Like, well, I don't care. Like, congratulations, you put on makeup and fancy dress, and you're You read lines that other people say, and you do that. You do it really well. But like that doesn't mean that you're someone that I should care about your opinion.
Yeah, well, and be, I mean, leading politics and, taking their, like, I mean, American politics is run by like Silicon Valley and Hollywood largely. I would say those are the two main force centers. And who?
And China.
And China.
Yeah, no, most American
and the Russian hackers.
No. I mean that very seriously, because if you look at where the funding comes from, so when making a movie, there's always the executive producer. So there's the director, the producer, the director, and the executive producer, right? Those are the three main titles. The director obviously handles the creative vision of the film. The producers handle the logistics, like getting crew on board and managing the production of the whole thing. What the executive producer does, the executive producer is solely responsible for fundraising. That's what an executive producer on a film does. Where most Hollywood executive producers get their money now is from China. So China has creative control from the monetary level. You don't ever see their names, because where does an executive producer get their money from? In the same way, where does a venture capitalist get their money from? From investors, right? So it's the same way. So executive producers in Hollywood are getting a lot of their money through Chinese investment sources. And you can find some of these, like Alibaba Pictures has done like films with Matt Damon, and they made some changes to Top Gun Maverick for some of the patches on his jacket. That was a whole thing. So China has a significant hand in a lot of American movies being produced from the financial level. Not that it's like Russian hackers, in the same kind of like, it's like actual money flows.
Yeah. My son just started gymnasium, and he's like really wants to study Chinese. And I had a conversation with him about that, because like I'm really trying to understand, like, the way I see it is like a large part of our society is set up around the idea of consumption. And what's fueling that consumption? Well, it's like selling people stuff they don't need by, making them into like everything. The most important things in the world are all physical material objects. So getting as much physical material objects as we possibly can is the most important thing to do. And how do we do that? We get like an endless supply of Chinese laborers who are willing to work in really, really bad factories for very, very cheap prices. Of course, it's not. It's also Bangladeshians and who knows what else.
Mexico and India, yeah.
But yeah, there's over 1 billion of them in China, of course. And so we're just like, it's a system that's been set up, and this is the system as well that I think, the war in Ukraine is about this system, actually, because that system wants to expand and wants to take in new territories. It's not like there's like, like this is a conscious idea, but I really think this individualist consumer society is a very imperialist type of civilization. And I think that's what's got the Russians scared to a certain extent as well. Russians are also influenced by consumerism, I think, but there's something else happening there. But so it's like, for me, like, I want to stay as far away from that system as I can, especially feeding the roots of it. I'm not a victim of it. I'm a part of it.
Casualty of war.
I feed it every day, and I want a better mouse. I got to get a better mouse, or I need like, some nice writing pens or something. I can't just write with like my old pencil.
There are nice pens,
whatever, right? So I'm always buying more and more stuff as well. But then I think, like, it's like you can become more and more entrenched in that system as well. And that's what I did in my corporate life. I worked for Microsoft for 8 years, and I just saw how that, like, it sucked my soul. It sucked the life out of my soul.
Yeah, you earlier, one of the things I also wanted to say was that you said it was American culture, and what I think people are seeing around the world, and this isn't necessarily clear, and so I don't fault people for not saying this, is we're actually witnessing, and we're probably several decades in, to the birth of some other culture. That culture ate America first. So it ate America first, and then it put on the skin of America, and then went marching around the world like, look, we're America. And so now everyone thinks of America in the United States as that corporate consumerist culture. The thing is I've discovered that's not American culture at all. We're actually fighting to get back to our original American values as a culture, which are long gone. And that's a political movement that's getting, slandered as violence and all this stuff. No, America is a country with its own unique culture. Yeah, it's not thousands of years old. America is young as a country, but it has a very rich and fully developed concept of itself. But it got eaten by this thing probably sometime in the 1950s is when the United States began to be devoured. When everything was great, right? No one's paying attention. And then it started walking around the world, and it parades around wearing America as a skin suit. And we're actually trying to get back to some vision of what it means to be America, what it means to be Americans in concert with the rest of the world. And I don't think most Americans who believe in that unique American culture want to have anything to do with dominating the world. Like, we just want our own country back. And so it's really difficult to have that discussion, because I can completely understand how for many people born in various places around the world, Europe, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, doesn't matter, Africa, who cares? To say, like, they've only known one kind of the United States. They've never been able to really see. But if you come fly to the United States and you go to certain places, particularly around the Midwest, you'll see it. But you wouldn't see it if you only watch TV. You'd only know, Team America, World Police, if you watch TV and movies, which is completely appropriate.
Yeah. I mean, so one of the ideas I've been thinking a lot about is kind of this distinction between old world and new world. And what I see is, like, in the new world, things move a lot faster. There's not so much rootedness. And so people can very easily get pulled, like, blown around in all kinds of different directions. And there's been a systematic work being done now by the postmodernists to destroy any kind of rootedness that was there already, even the ones that just went back a couple of hundred years. And this hit my life as well, right? And I came from the new world. I moved to the old world. And so now I'm living now in a tiny little town, 300 people. There's a local woman here who tells stories of the local area, like, professionally. And she's amazing. And there's so much stories just embedded in this this tiny little town here. So much history. We have our own little museum where they have, like, pictures of the house. The house I bought is 360 years old, at least. That was the first time it was registered in any kind of common public book or anything like that. 360 years, and still the original tree work and framework and everything like that. It's like a half timbered house. Just, yeah, the value of kind of connecting down into those roots again. So that's been my response to that, is as I've realized, like, wow, there's a flood coming now. There's a flood, and it's getting stronger and stronger. And what I see, and so now I promised that I would go on a rant and criticize Americans' work and stuff like that. It's like the response for a lot of guys is like, oh, there's a flood coming. Okay, guys, let's all go to the gym and find some really heavy weights. Then we lift up these weights as much as we possibly can, and then we'll, like, write to each other and post pictures on ourselves on Facebook, and we'll compete about how much we can bench press, and then we'll be able to, like, stand against the flood. And it's like, yeah, great. Maybe like that's gonna work, but, like, I don't know. It's just, there's a superficiality to it. That it's like, you guys, like, it's a solution to the problem in some way, because it gives you something to hold on to, but it's not a very good solution. It's not a very good solution. I don't believe it. It's not going to last.
I love it. I agree. I completely agree, because I'm caught up in the same wave, right? The same wave of we're facing ultimately a cultural and spiritual war, right? Where we're in the middle of a cultural and spiritual war, but men they think they can fight it with material means, right? So it's like, oh, if I just get super ripped and get a lot of bullets and get emergency food and I've got my night vision and I go in the woods with my guys, like, sorted. It's like, I mean, yeah, okay, right? No, look, firearms. We were talking about this. Firearms fetishism, firearms idolatry. Look, there's nothing wrong with these things. This is an American thing. There's nothing wrong with firearms, but you can't make your AR-15 your savior. I'm sorry, like, and guys don't want to hear that, though, because it's challenging their notions. It's challenging the notions of power.
Yeah. Well, they won't even admit that they're making their savior, right? They'll find some way of rationalizing it or putting it. And it's like if the thing you, like, get most excited about in your week is going out and shooting your gun, then, like, that's become your religion. Religion is religare. It comes from Latin religare. That's which we gather around. So if all your friends are gathering around shooting guns or going to jujitsu or earning a lot of money, that's your religion. You might go to church on Sundays occasionally and call yourself a Christian. But, like, if that's not what you're excited about, then then that's not what your religion is. I'm sorry, but, like, and if it's a veganism, then veganism is your religion. If it's climate change you're scared of, then you have an apocalyptic death religion. Like, these are the religions that people have these days. And then, in Europe, we've given up being Christians completely. So we've just totally surrendered to these other new religions as well. Americans kind of play the dance like, oh yeah, we're Christians, but we're also like, we don't really care. Like we mainly go to church to like network and connect with other people and whatever, right?
A lot of that. There's a lot of that. Yeah. And I was listening just before we started this podcast and we got online. I was listening to a talk by this Christian apologist, theologian. His name is Joe Boot, and he's British, Canadian, and he was literally talking about the word culture and cultivate and cult. All of these things are the same. They're from the same word root, which is what are we cultivated in? What are we being raised? What are we being steeped in? He gave a much more eloquent definition than that, and I'll post a link in the show notes because the talk is brilliant. I love Joe Boot's work, and it's like, what is your culture? What are you being raised in? What are you being steeped in? What are the values? And firearms culture is a thing, and this isn't to pick on firearms or jujitsu or gym culture or whatever. And it's like we all have different cultures, subcultures. Yeah.
We're not trying to take away your guns.
Well, there are people trying to take away the guns, but that's a whole other thing, right?
Yeah, but it's not me,
right? But it's like that's a whole thing. It's like what cultures are you a part of, and what are the inherent values of those cultures? And not only what are the inherent values of those cultures, what values are left out of those cultures? Because that's the thing. It's not that the values within a culture are necessarily bad. It's that most materially oriented cultures have values that are excluded, right? And it's the stuff that's left out that's truly problematic, that there's no deeper values beyond the material accomplishments. Like money is not a bad thing, but if in the pursuit of money is the only value at all costs, there's some pretty important things left out. And guys don't like asking these questions because it forces them to acknowledge their weaknesses.
Well, it doesn't even. I mean, you can say like it's not. It doesn't have to be the only value, right? But if it's the highest value,
right?
If it's just the central thing, and then you say, well, we have to be ethical and stuff like that. But if it's a thing that the most valuable resource you have is your attention, and if your attention, of most of your waking hours of the day is going towards earning money, then that's forming your mind. It's wiring your nervous system to be orientating your life, your energy, your creative powers towards money. That's what it's doing. And you need to do that especially as a young man to a certain extent, but you need to realize that there are things that far supersede money. There's love, there's beauty, there's truth. Those are three things, I think, which even if you don't believe in God, you can believe in those three things. And if you don't have those, then you're gonna get lost at some point. You're gonna get lost because it's so easy to cut corners into.
I absolutely agree, and I think too many people around the world now, not just in America and not just in Europe, they grow up with money or some material pursuit as the highest value. And yes, they maybe they're taught to go about it ethically, but they're not taught to go about it in a godly way. And going about something in an ethical way and going about something in a godly way are two very, very different things. And that speaks to a lot of the heart of our religiosity that's been excised, at least from Western culture, right? In the notion of well, what is this life for? Is it for the pursuit of material pleasures? Is it for the creation of cultural products? And I don't disagree with a lot of guys in the men's movement who think we need to be producing culture. I think they're right. I think they just don't go far enough, right? It's like these things all flow from a central source. And are you willing to tap into that central source? And I feel very thankful that there are more and more men, and I do mean men, willing to ask that question within the men's movement itself, because I think it's very vital. And it needs to be led by men. I think women are doing it too, of course, but men seem a bit more stubborn about the whole process, maybe. And maybe you can speak to some of that in the work that you do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I think attention is absolutely central. I think storytelling and art in general is vital to get people's attention again. And then we've made a decision just in this last month in Maniphesto that every single guy who's a member in Maniphesto needs to have a daily contemplative practice. And so we want every single guy. And so this is just like doing the basic work of training your attention to become the master of it again, because we have the smartest, most brilliant people in the world, psychologists, engineers, marketing people, they are working day and night to create the tools that we're using every single day to take our attention away from us and to enslave it. And you can talk to anybody that works in marketing. How do they do this? Well, they appeal to your base desires. Like you basically take the 7 deadly sins or whatever it is, like the fleshly needs, and they're getting even more and more blatant with it because people love it. And it works. That's the thing, is it's working incredibly well. So there's a war going on for your attention. And I think that if you want to have any chance in that war, every single day, you need to be doing some kind of daily contemplative practice. And that includes, for me, for most of these guys, we're explicitly not a Christian organization. And I think for most men, journaling. I journal every single morning. And I think that's probably a really good place to start, is some kind of journaling practice. To train your mind to focus on what is actually important in your life, in the world, for you. Where are you going? What do you want to do? And maintaining that over a period of time, instead of just being pulled from side to side to side to side. For a lot of guys, right?
Let's talk about journaling, because I get ads on my Instagram and stuff for journals all the time, and I know a lot of men. I don't personally journal. I will I will make notes about my life in the evenings when significant things happening. In my storage closet, I have books full of journals that I've just made notes of my life, just historical touch points, but I've never made journaling a daily practice. Let's talk about that for a minute. How do you go about doing it? What sort of do you have a philosophy of journaling? Is there a style? Because it's not something that I know very much about, besides today this and this happened and I felt this about this, but I don't think that that's what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, my core practice is prayer. I'll put that in first, just in case someone was wondering. So I pray before I journal, and that's important for me, and that makes a difference. But then I'd say it's a pragmatic approach. I don't have a philosophy to it. It started with some guru, business guru, startup guy who had a daily journal with a whole lot of questions in it that you answered every single day. And so someone recommended this, and so I bought his book, and then I started answering these questions. And then what I realized is that these aren't exactly the right questions for me. And so I started changing some of the questions, and that's developed. In the beginning, I used to journal morning and evening, and I did that for quite a long time, probably for about 2.5 years. Now I just journal in the mornings. But the way I do it is so I have it's all those books there. Those are the last, these ones. Sorry, these ones. Yeah, those are the last journals that I've completed. But the way I do it is I have these questions I answer every single morning.
That's all. I'm seeing what 12 questions or something.
There, and then I do my writing in here. I also have weekly meetings with my wife where we also write minutes from all of our meetings. And then once a week, I do a weekly review, which is these questions over here.
So I see am I counting something like 10, 15 questions, something like that?
Yeah, daily there are 11 questions. And one of them is not really a question. One of them is a thing I have to do. And then the weekly one is a little bit longer. There's 8, but a whole lot of sub points to it as well. So some of them I'll just skip sometimes as well. Not every question I'll answer every single time. But yeah, and most of them often I'll write some days I'll write just like 5, 6, 7 lines or something like that. Sometimes I'll write 3 pages. Very, very different. The first question I have for myself is just free journaling, write what's on your mind. The second one is reflections on the book that you read yesterday. So if I didn't read a book, then I don't write anything, right? But I found I sometimes just read books, but I never actually implement anything. And so it's good to the next day be well, what stuck from that book, and how can I be actually implementing in my life instead of just moving on from to the next book again. But making sure I actually integrate. So yeah, and then I work with setting priorities for every single day. I know what I need to do every day to make it a success.
And those are the natures of the questions. This is brilliant, by the way. This is very helpful, because I know sometimes I just kind of fly by the seat of my pants through the day and everything's great, but I always know that, and I'm always thinking and turning ideas over in my head, and it's that's always an ongoing kind of thing, and I don't subject myself to any mainstream media, anything. It's always my whole day as and especially because I live alone, so it's I'm in a contemplative practice all day. But there's definitely a need for a higher level of organization, especially when you're married and when you have kids and all of that stuff as well. So I appreciate the insight into that. What are some of the other, if you don't mind me asking, what are some of the other questions that you ask yourself?
I mean, I can give you the daily questions. I've actually made a video on this practice on my YouTube channel, so people can go and find it. Something about like a daily journaling practice. But I actually don't tell the questions. I'm happy to share these questions if people want to have them.
Yeah, please.
So I can give them all. But so I have, the first one is free journaling. Next one is reflections of the book I read yesterday. Then what am I grateful for, or wins from yesterday? So stuff that I succeeded with or just grateful for. Then the next question is, did I complete my most important thing yesterday? Why or why not? Then I write out what are the most important things of the week. And if I already know what the most important things today, I also write it there. But I write, in the beginning, in the weekly review, I'm going to say like, what do I need to do this week, right? Then I plan my full day, as in like I write down on a piece of paper all of my appointments for that day. So I know exactly the things that I need to do at different times that day. I write down very quickly, right? Like I'll write like John, 3:00, and Peter, whatever, right? Then I write, and this question I don't always write, but I say one thing I can get excited about today is, and then a situation that could trip me up today could be, and the best way for me to deal with that is ... Then the next question is, what is a good opportunity to recharge energy and connect with? It used to actually be my wife. I had that as my wife. Now I just have it like another person today. So it's ... Most of the time it's my wife, but it could be someone else that I write down. Make sure I make a meaningful connection with somebody. And then the last thing I do is, what is the one thing that I can do today that makes everything else easier or unnecessary, which comes from a book called The One Thing. It's a great book to read. And then the last one is to update my habit tracking. So I have daily habits that and journaling is one of them. I track. Right now, I need to run 300 kilometers in this quarter. So that's what I'm tracking at the moment.
How far into that are you?
I just hit 250 kilometers yesterday.
Okay, got it. So it's not like you have to run 350 kilometers like today. I'm a little running behind.
No, 200. No. Yeah, it's in a 3-month period, right? Okay. So it's
okay. So 3 kilometers a day, which is like what, like a mile and a half, 2 miles, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah. So I started much lower. I've been building it up.
Got it. Okay, so the journaling is it's like a self-organizational mental productivity. I don't like the word productivity; it's cheap, but it's sort of like it's a mental organizational tool as you begin.
You know what it's doing? It's bringing my ideas about myself and often my fantasies about myself into alignment with reality. Because when I don't write things down, it's easier to have all kinds of ideas that I'm going to be doing what I'm doing and where I want to get to. But 6 months later, I'm probably going to be doing something slightly different. And so by writing it down, I'm creating a funnel for myself that I kind of need to follow and remind myself about what it is I'm actually doing. And I actually get to see, I give myself goals and I set a time frame for doing that. And then when I started doing it, I found that this is the experience of all the guys who come onto Maniphesto Core, is that they have highly unrealistic expectations to themselves. So they set themselves way too high goals in way too many areas, and they try to change their entire life, everything at the same time, and then they fail. And then they give up because it's too hard to get up again. And it's too hard to see in the face that like your ideas about yourself and your ideas about reality are pure fantasy, and actually you're a very different place to where you think you are. Very, very painful thing to realize. But the journaling thing slowly but surely forces you to see reality because it's keeping you on a path.
Got it. Well, let's talk about this, because this is getting into some of the men's inner work that I wanted to talk to you about. It's like we build up. So we talked about the obsession that many men have with their outer achievements, status, muscles, whatever they measure themselves by materially. But now we're sort of thinking a little differently, or talking differently about men have these internal visions of themselves that don't align with their external reality because they're not accountable. Or the word that came to mind was originally integrity. And for a lot of guys, including for me, coming into integrity and myself in my own life was like one of the most painful and transformative things I've ever had to do.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing you can say is that, like, sometimes when people say, oh, wait, since you've been doing all of this stuff, you must be becoming a much better person, right? And my answer was like, no, I'm actually mainly just realizing how terrible a person I am. Like that's how difficult it is to actually do what I say and say what I'm going to do and to stick to it. It's really, really difficult. We lie to ourselves all the time. It doesn't help as well that our lives are lived through these things. Like we're fixated on screens. So we're living in a virtual fantasy world most of the time. Half of the population, wants to like move off there and leave like physical reality, which is a massive delusion, if you ask me. It's not going to be very good when people start doing that properly. It's already not very good when people are doing it properly. There's plenty of people who are like moved into the metaverse.
Okay.
Based, like see that as a more important part of the life than base reality. And so we're just living in a fantasy world, and it's fueled by constant entertainment. It's just this constant flow of entertainment that like hits your dopamine receptors and whatever it is and makes you feel like, oh, I'm doing great. It's like, no, you're sucking your soul dry of life. You're really, and this, I'm talking to myself just as much.
Sure.
Like this is what I realized, and this moving to a tiny little town helped.
Total different pace of life change.
Yeah, different pace of life and different level of personal connection. It's a very natural way to live in a small community of people who actually want to be with each other and who share their lives with each other and do stuff, build stuff, make stuff together. The whole village right now is working. We have next weekend, there's a big folk music festival happening just across the road from me in one of the old farms. And the whole village we were over 100 people there last weekend, helping to like build the stage and put together the stuff and things like that. And it's beautiful. It's amazing. It's a very natural, connected way of being together as human beings.
Yeah, we've completely lost touch with that. And
none of us are getting paid to do it. We're all doing it.
Yeah, I mean, you're not getting paid in money, right? But the spiritual rewards, let's say, the cultural rewards, the community rewards, and that's the thing is that we lack an ability to measure things if we can't quantify it. That's part of the scientism kind of world that we're living in. It's like, well, you're not getting paid. And I know that you didn't mean it this way, but it's like the rewards, like it's obvious to me, it's evident to me, the immaterial rewards that you're getting from the process. And if only in the binding that it happens for the village producing this festival together of people being forced to collaborate on something that creates joy for others. You can't quantify that. How can you quantify the trust that you build with your neighbor, or the connection that you make with someone who lives on the other side of town, or the memories that you get to share year after year by continuing to do the same thing over and over again in new ways? Like, you can't quantify that. And this is the superficiality that so many of us are forced into because, our large city way of living paradoxically divides us from each other, et cetera. And like, well, if I can't measure it, is it real? I'm like, well, yeah, it's very real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a really good example of when I moved out here, and it's 2 years ago I moved out here, then there's a plan to build a bridge across from the mainland onto this island. And if they build this bridge, then it'll be a shortcut for traffic coming from Germany and going across to Copenhagen and up to Sweden. So there'll be probably about 17,000 cars a day traveling across it and going straight through this area where I'm living as well. And when I first moved here, I thought, well, okay, I get it that the local people don't want that bridge because it's going to change the nature and change the environment. But surely the sum total of benefit will be greater because those cars have to go somewhere and it's going to be more efficient. It's going to save all of the petrol from all of the extra driving and, reduce carbon emissions and be more efficient for a lot of people, save a lot of people a lot of time. So why does some small little community in the south of Denmark get to decide why everybody else should spend a whole extra half an hour driving a longer way around? That was my thought when I moved here, and I mentioned it to some of the people who lived in the town, and they reacted quite angrily to me. And I didn't really get that, but I really so now if someone asks me like what I think about that bridge, I'm like, screw that bridge! Like I don't know why a bridge in this place, and it's become what I've realized. It's just like this mindset that we have. It's just so fixated on efficiency, growth. Kind of like just like get to your destination as fast as possible and do it as efficiently as possible. As like that's not actually what creates happiness in life. Human happiness is some completely other things. And and it will totally transform this place if this bridge is built. And it's not even sure that the people driving through, they will become more happy. They will just get to, they or have more meaningful lives or anything, right? Maybe what they need is actually, it's like we've come to really appreciate that we're quite far away from Copenhagen. And if they built this motorway, then, everything's just going to become more this culture. You can see the influence of a big city being close by as kind of like just a kind of cultural, sociological thing. But it's much easier just to see it as you spoke about, like a thing that had like eaten American culture, and you kind of, what I saw was like, this like monstrous thing that is devouring, and so that's what consumption. It's in the word there. It's about devouring, and it never gets satisfied. It just wants to devour more and more and more and more. And to do that, it has to be more and more and more efficient. Everything has to be more and more and more efficient, and we need to stop thinking in this way if we're actually going to recover ourselves and our souls.
I agree. It's part of us. It's part of us. Now, I can speak for Americans and say, efficiency, growth, expansion is part of who we are as people now. And I don't think it was always that way, because there's this word called household, and which was the center of economic production. You and your wife and your kids all live and work together on the farm, or you have a trade or something like that. And it's all run out of the home, and your expectations for your life are quite simple and quite modest. And this was the American frontier kind of lifestyle. But then you have the Industrial Revolution, where a bunch of people's labor can be put together to produce something even greater. And then, you're taken out of the home, and we begin losing touch with each other and losing touch with everything. And then the factory mindset is about efficiency and all that stuff. And that happened in the United States, and it happened in Europe as well. And it kind of took over. And it sort of metastasized in the 1980s, especially. In fact, there's a very famous speech. This is why Jimmy Carter, who was the president from 1976 to 1980, he gave a speech called The Crisis of Confidence. And a lot of people said this is why he wasn't reelected. Because in the Crisis of Confidence speech, he actually asked, this was after there was a bunch of stuff going on in Iran as well. He said, like, are we as Americans going to continue being Americans, or are we going to outsource everything to China and become a cheap consumer culture? And he asked this like in a presidential address, like on national television, like, stop everything, we're going to have a presidential address. And obviously he lost the election, and Ronald Reagan became president. And then we had the 80s, right? So America made a choice in the 1980s about this. And so as you speak about this efficiency, I agree with you. Like, I don't want to, like, as soon as you started telling the story, they're talking about building this bridge, and and it's all these cars going to go through. Is like, I think I see where he's going with this, because a lot of Americans are beginning to ask the same question. Like, I don't want a high efficiency way of life anymore. I want to slow down and have a values-based way of life, or even a godly life. And how are we going to get back to that as a culture? And as a world culture, let's say. I don't actually know, but it's sufficient that men are beginning to ask these questions, because I think they're all related. Masculinity, Christianity, values, et cetera, changing lifestyles, moving to more rural settings, slowing down. All these questions, I think, are very related.
Yeah. I mean, the root of the problem, what I see it really, is that man has abandoned his priestly responsibility, and so he doesn't even know what that means. Most guys, they have no idea. There's my favorite podcast in the world. It's called Lord of Spirits. There's two guys who dig into the roots in every single episode of some kind of issue, really, really far back. One of them actually reads Sumerian, which is the very first written language, the very first civilization that could write down. He can read.
That's cool.
Their writing, and Akkadian as well. All these little clay tablets that we have from, this is like 4,000 years before Christ, I think 7,000 years before Christ. So they even have, so the Epic of Gilgamesh is the oldest story. I actually have it right up there.
It's beautiful.
That's the oldest story that we have in existence. There's a flood story in there as well, very similar to the biblical flood story in the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Humbaba.
It's also a man's search for meaning in life.
Humbaba, the great demon, right?
Yeah. Oh, you know it. Yeah, great. So the point is that, like, the Lord of Spirits podcast, they make it much better than I can, but like, this has been man's primary responsibility as the mediator between the macrocosm and the microcosm, which is, man himself, and to be able to bring things together without, in love and truth and beauty. and this is what the priestly role has been, and it's totally been trashed, and so there's been a devaluation of the sacred, or total disconnection from the sacred in life. And I think that's the way I see it. There's the path that we need to tread to bring these things back. But I mean, it's nothing you can figure out on a podcast.
Right.
So I don't know how we can even start talking about these things, right?
Well, I think we can. I think as you're saying that, I think back to World War II. Like the founding myth of the United States right now is World War II. We don't go much further back than that, actually. Like, yes, we have our Revolutionary War, but a lot of people don't know the details about that. And, but freely, like America in its current version was born in World War II. And it's a little bit like, it's a little bit, it looks like from this side of the Atlantic, like everything that we know about Europe died in World War II. Like you want to talk about the transition from the old world to the new world, like that happened at the end of World War II. And it was which was a big mess. But it was also this transition, I think, across two different ways of living. I think it was also the transition from godliness to efficiency, because I think the case that the elites probably made and that the media made following World War II is like, look at all the atrocities of World War II, look at all the death of World War I, look at the atomic bomb and environmental devastation. Like the old guard has failed, and now we have to do it. Like God is dead. Right. That's when they just kind of declared for everyone, by the way, World War II, God is now dead. We killed him. Now we're going to live this efficiency kind of driven world. And that hasn't worked out. That hasn't worked out so great. But, we're talking about the difference in old world and new world, America versus Europe, a godly way of living versus an efficiency way of living. Like, I really think like the World War II, the 1950s and the 1960s, that whole 20-year period was when that shift really happened, between like 1945 and 1965, probably.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, that was when America became the center of the world, and that is the American identity, if anything, right? It's like America is the only part that really counts, right? That's why, at least that's the perspective that we have here in Europe, is that Americans like don't have passports. Every European has a passport, but like I think something like 14% of Americans have passports.
But I can explain that.
You call the World Series of baseball is just American teams, even though it's called the World Series.
Fair.
It's like there's
this
Canada, kind of like
Canada.
Or they get to play as well.
Yeah, a couple. Well, sometimes they'll show up in the playoffs.
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, there's something really interesting there about the way I listened to a documentary recently about the end of World War I and like Woodrow Wilson's kind of grand dreams of peace, and how he had this like highly idealistic vision. And that ended up with the Treaty of Versailles, which was just basically like the winners like crushing the losers, and him being like probably the main cause of how badly that went, right? And so it goes back to me for this idea of like the disconnection between the head and the body, because for me he was a man who was just and this was he was a sickly, poor, weak man who lived up in the world of ideas, but felt and there's letters and documents about how he felt jealous about like his political opponents who are far more embodied and strong-bodied than he was, right? And so that's this weird thing. It's like we're stuck up in our heads, but we're obsessed with bodies, sexuality bodies, or just like physical material bodies of things that we can own or whatever it is. It's such an interesting thing.
Dig further into that, because that's we're stuck in our heads and obsessed with our bodies. I want to hear more. I want to hear you expound on that.
Do you want to hear my grand theory of the history of the church on that?
Yes, go.
Okay, I'll try to give it. So the way I see it is, basically, the Christian church was one whole church. And then in 1054, the Great Schism happened. This was the breaking of the Orthodox and the Catholics. The Orthodox had like a conciliar understanding of what the church was. So there was many different patriarchs, and they were all equal. And to make any decisions, they all had to be agreed. So there was a kind of like the only head was Christ, and they were just the body. The Catholics, on the other hand, as you well know, they had a pope, right? So there was an excessive focus of attention and energy and power in the head. which was a man, and it was a fallible head that they then created, and
Not fallible of them.
yeah. And so then what happened is the West kind of like focused this power in the head, and that meant that it could create a very powerful vision that was very attractive and could drive forward a lot of development. So the West was able to drive forward, had this strength and power, but it also became tyrannical because too much power was invested out there. And so what happened? Well, then we got to the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century, where then the body rejects the head and explodes into many different fragments, but still maintains an excessive, the same fundamental kind of imbalance of head overweight or something like that. That in short, that's the first time I've tried to explain that publicly.
No, that's great. I love that, because I think it explains a lot of things that a lot of men are going through. Like that's what we're talking about, is that we were talking about this flood's coming, right? And so so we consume all this news through our screens, right? And taking it at face value. Oh, disaster's coming, doomsday. Pick your poison. Are aliens coming? Is the grid down, economic collapse, whatever? And so we're stuck in our heads processing all this information. So what's our response to that? Our response is we have to fortify our bodies. Get the beef, get the bullets, get the muscles and all this stuff. And like all those things are fine for what they are, but it's not an embodied experience of like, it's a superficial response to a very serious spiritual question. And it's not an embodied, well, what if I fought back this war with virtue? Right. And it's the same manifestation of the same thing that shows up in another context.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's something about like bringing yourself into alignment with yourself, which is almost like a mystical thing. I don't think it can be done in a rational, straightforward way. And so, in Maniphesto, because we're not explicitly Christian, I just tell guys like, whatever it is, look at what you're standing on as in like your foundational beliefs about reality and yourself, whatever they are, and dig deeper. Dig deeper in whatever it is. I've written this article called the finding your urfather, and so the idea is like if you call yourself a Marxist, like go and study Marx,
Right.
read his poetry, read about his life descriptions, read about his funeral, like read if you're a Darwinist, then like go really go and look at the roots of the things where you come from. Where does it come from? So it's about reconnecting to the father at a metaphysical level, and like I think it'll lead you pretty much either to Athens, Socrates, and then Plato and Aristotle, or it'll lead you to the Abrahamic religions, stories of Genesis. Basically, I think that's where our civilization comes from. And some people have like oh, screw the civilization. I'm gonna live in the civilization, enjoy its benefits, but I'm gonna become a Buddhist or I'm gonna become a Hindu or something like that, right? Or I'm just gonna be like a New Age, whatever. And these people, I'm quite patient with them, I think, but no, I'm going to say it on your podcast, is that I'm probably way too patient with them because they're seriously deluded, like it's a stupid idea to think that you can like just take in the practices of a religion that's foreign and exotic and then just bring it into your everyday Western civilization context. Like, oh, I'm a ayahuasca shaman from Peru now that I can like, because I did 40 days of fasting down in Peru and took a whole lot of psychedelics and flipped out completely. And now I understand the mysteries of the universe. Like, no, that is a total delusion. It's a very dangerous thing. And I see people who have died because of these kinds of delusions. I had a guy who was a good friend who jumped off his balcony on these psychedelics because who knows what.
Yeah.
Jumped off his balcony. Christmas.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
Yeah, and more. So it's like, this is why I'm also like, I've been kind of like, Maniphesto came from these areas. We started at Burning Man, that's full of psychedelics. But it's like, I'm more and more, so this wasn't the first death in our network. And there was another guy who I've been like repeatedly saying like, hey, there's something wrong here. We need to be aware of this guy. There's something you need to be aware of. And everyone's like, no, everything's great. No, there's no problem whatsoever. And then another suicide. So it's like, that it's just so clear. Like these things you can't just do this. It doesn't work. You can't just adopt whatever it is, and then think, we're a part of a civilization. On just the everything but Christianity thing, like, it's just going to leave you confused and lost and rootless. And you're going to know it deep down in your heart somewhere. There's always going to be a feeling of discomfort, and it's some kind of strange compensation, getting back at your dad thing. Bingo. Or something like that. I'm being very judgmental.
No, I will go there with you.
But like a lot of these guys have dad issues. They're going to have dad issues. That's, they haven't found peace with their dad. That's why they can't find peace with the father figures of their own civilization. They can't take those steps back because they're normally angry with their actual biology.
Yes. And many of them have,
and it's probably not the answer in every case, but,
and many of them have reason to be. That's part of it. And we can dig into that. But I did want to say thank you for saying all that, because I agree fully, and I've come from that world, and I love what you just said about finding your father. Like, if you're into Marx, read Marx. If you're into Darwin, read Darwin. If you're into Nietzsche, read Nietzsche. Understand who these men were. How far back is that going to take you?
What was their inspiration?
Yeah, but
what was the foundation they?
Yeah, and I think a lot of men, though, that's not the direction. They're looking for their mother, right? And that's Eastern mysticism. Eastern mysticism, the entire point of that whole world, and New Age is entirely based on Eastern mysticism. Eastern mysticism says that you do not exist and that your free will is an illusion, and you have to undo the illusion of your own free will. The knot has to untie itself. And if you're still here, you haven't tried hard enough. So keep trying harder and harder to undo yourself. And the trick is, you can't. The mind cannot untie its own knot. And there's this promise, this mystical promise of enlightenment, nirvana, the extinguishing of the flame. If you meditate hard enough, you will realize your own non-existence, and you will merge back into the Godhead, and you will cease existing. But no one's actually met an enlightened person. You've never actually.
Well, it's. I mean, what they're talking about is just like physical and spiritual death. Basically, it's death. So it's a religion worshiping death.
Yes,
and that's where it's going to lead.
That is where it leads.
That's what it is. It's you look at all those qualities that they describe, and then what death is. It's like, it's the same thing.
Yes, yeah. They conceive of it as it's functionally the same thing, but the way that they frame it is like non-existence, right? Like you die. But rather than dying in body, you just evaporate into the cosmos in your own unique.
You get reabsorbed into the ocean. Yeah. The drop in the ocean is kind of like the thing that it is, right? And so the definition of love that I really like, and that's which I think is at the heart, not just of Christianity, but the heart of Western civilization. Love is the kind of ordering principle that comes from above, that includes every part of the multiplicity without destroying any of its uniqueness. That makes it fit perfectly into the whole. So it's able to retain every single part of what makes it personal and unique and valuable. It even becomes far more itself. Before it was not even itself. It's through love that it can be integrated into the whole and become more of itself. And that's something that's alien to these Eastern traditions as well. It's like, no, they just believe in it's tyranny, basically, because it's the principle that comes from above. It erases all of your personality. You become like nothing. You become one with everything. You cease to exist. That's tyranny. That's the definition of Trinity. Tyranny is like Stalin says, everybody needs to do what I say. That's like that. It's a tyrannical idea. It's opposite of love.
It's ultimately self-negating. That's the entire thrust of the whole thing. Like, not only, and this is where the New Age, like, you could probably make the case that in its pure essence, Hinduism and Buddhism as self-negating religions aren't necessarily harmful in their intent. That's a whole, like, well, let's just stipulate that for now, for the point that I'm getting.
I think their intent is positive, and I think they probably helped a lot of people. I think without them, people would be even more lost. Like, you need to have a religion. Religion is what binds people together, and so without religion, so I think. They're better than nothing.
Right. So, but yes, but in their pure state, in Hinduism and Buddhism, their pure state in India or Japan or China or whatever. But where the New Age takes all that and makes it so destructive is it takes that act of self-negation and it commoditizes it and commercializes it in terms of books and practices and guru, like the American style guru and ceremonies and processes, and you just dump tons of money into this process of ultimately self-negation. And that's what's so destructive about it. Versus like, there are lots of people who identify as a Buddhist and they're paying all this money. And it's like, well, Buddhism is free. You can like just sit and meditate. You don't have to do a whole thing. Right. But so it's this Western, like New Age is this Western commoditization, commercialization of a lot of these Eastern mystical principles that people just don't understand.
And I get it why people want to do it because like they're used to paying for stuff. Actually paying a high price is how you determine quality. If something's expensive, it's probably good. So that's why they want to like go to the most expensive gurus who are taking the most high prices, because that's what we've been trained to understand the world. Like you get quality by paying money. And so I get it. But yeah, it's such a destructive path, as you say, because you're just reinforcing it. They go very well together. The individualist consumerism, and then you just become like this zombie. This is why guys like John Vervaeke, Jonathan Peugeot talk about zombies all the time, and it's so appropriate for our culture. And why you have like zombie walks where tens of thousands of people dress up as zombies and walk around the streets as zombies. It's because that's exactly what we're becoming. We're becoming zombies. And the perfect religion for zombies is consumerism, individual consumerism mixed with Eastern mysticism. That's how you do it. Because you just like, everything is just a part of like greater good, and everything happens for a reason. And so you don't have to worry about anything. And if your kids are going haywire and everything is collapsing around you, it's like, oh, well, great. I mean, the Bhagavad Gita, the central story is like these guys who are like about to go to war with each other, with their own families and the people that are loved. And they're just told like, well, that's your role. Kill them because you're a warrior. So you should just kill them. And so it's like, well, yeah, I get there's a depth to that as well. And it's not just totally as I'm caricaturing it right now, right? But like, that is the central lesson of their entire civilization. And it's not the right thing to put in the center. It's not the right thing to put in the center. There are higher truths than you have a specific role at a specific time. You need to do a specific action. Of course, there can be truth.
So I have a bunch of different directions I want to go. I love this feeling. And the direction I'm going to go is, okay, so you're talking about Maniphesto, which is an explicitly non-Christian organization. Totally get that. And as the sort of the men's inner work world, which you and I both come from, has absorbed and is really in some ways born out of a lot of these like sort of New Age, Jungian, at least kind of archetypes, which are not compatible with Christianity fully. Like it's not completely incompatible. Well, it's at the most fundamental level, it's incompatible with Christianity. How do you square these, with men coming into these practices where it's like you have these beliefs that aren't serving you at the very fundamental, like it. So for example, like you walk into a men's retreat, like I couldn't go to a Mankind Project retreat right now. Like setting aside the fact that they may be woke and that whole thing. So let's set that aside. Walking into that,
you might just end up with a pride version of it or something like that these days. They're doing that.
Bad. So okay, so let's set aside that. If I were to just put me back in time about 10 years before the wokeness started to happen in the Mankind Project. It was about 10 years ago that I went. I would sit in that environment and I would be like, you're talking about things that I know are fundamentally incompatible with the Christian way of viewing the world, which is the truth. But the thing is, I don't run that organization, right? So as you, and this isn't calling you out for anything, it's just how do you make it work? Because I recognize that these men, they need the work, and you can't go all in with a Christian worldview on men that are still coming into any amount of reconciliation with parts of themselves that they've disowned. Like, how do you manage that, right? You get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest thing is like, my fundamental work is not to convert guys or even to give them mystical experiences. My fundamental work is to help them to reach their goals.
Okay.
So I want them to be able to make a plan and bring their goals in and their ideas about themselves in alignment with reality. Okay. And so that's what I focus on, basically, because I found like that's, Christian guys really need that work as well, sometimes more than non-Christian guys. Here in Denmark, I have a friend who's studying theology and wants to become a priest. And so he'll tell you, like, he has never met a single real man in the Danish church. We have a state church in Denmark. It's the most, like, politically, it's like a weasel organization. Sorry to call it that, but it's not as bad as the Swedish one. But I mean, that's terrible.
Europe.
So
we may be bad. We're not as bad as those Swedes. Oh yeah, Swedish guys are like, what about the Greeks?
We tell a lot of jokes in Denmark. We tell a lot of jokes about the Swedes.
Of course, obviously, who doesn't?
Yeah. But so I mean, that's part of the answer. And at the same time, I also say this, like, when you share foundational beliefs with men, you can take them far further than when you don't, or when you have to, like, do all that basic work. It's sometimes very tiring.
Yeah.
It's very, very tiring, because I have to have a lot of patience, because some guys are really, I mean, the biggest challenge I think I face is men who are chasing extreme experiences in life. In Denmark, we're not, especially, this is a big difference in old world, new world, is all here. People have not so focused on kind of like earning lots of money, and like, we don't have as much richness and kind of like, the materialist thing as well. So there are other values that people are driven by here, but they'll often be driven just by, like, experiences, and so that can lead to, like, a lot of, like, sexual dysfunction, misuse of sexual energy, and it can also lead to like partying and drugs and things like that, which, like, self-sabotage their lives. And so, and it's hard to address those things directly with guys. You can't just always talk to them directly about it. So yeah, it takes more patience. And sometimes I'm like, why am I doing this? And then the reason why I'm doing it is because I'm a new world person, so I move fast. And so I realized, well, if I move slower and I take my whole organization with me, and I have a lot of very, guys I work very closely with who I really appreciate, who aren't Christians as well, but they have a lot of other value, because the way I see it is, like, you said, like, okay, well, obviously Christian has the truth, and a lot of these guys, they're at the deepest level disagree. But I actually see most of the guys I'm working with, even if they call themselves, whatever else, in reality, they grew up in a Christian culture. And most of their fundamental beliefs about reality are based on Christian values. Like, they don't really have Buddhist values. They think they do.
Sure.
But they don't really have, whatever it is. So actually there's, I focus on what we agree on, and it's often just gets much bigger by me doing that. And when I speak the truth to them in a way that is, like, fits things together for them, then they understand the truth, and then they follow the truth, right? Because the truth will set you free. And so Christianity, this is the way Christianity. I've just read a letter written by Justin Martyr, who was an early Christian martyr in the 150 AD. He wrote a letter to the Roman emperor, and there he kind of he explains how the patterns of paganism are exactly the same patterns that are found in Christianity.
Yeah.
And so, like Odin, he didn't refer to Odin. I can't remember the exact examples he used, but, like, Odin also hung on a tree for 3 days and lost his eye and then received sight. And so there's similar patterns in all of these things. And some people use these to, like, disprove Christianity, but, like, the way the early Christians understood this is like, no, this is just like, this is real. This stuff is real. It's not made up. Like, these patterns are fundamental parts of reality, and God is active in all of the world, right? And then, just some of the gods that were telling you to, like, sacrifice your friends to them were probably more demons than gods as well. And that's basically the case that Justin Martyr was making to the Roman Empire. He got killed. He martyred.
That would be, he earned his last name. Martyr is a really unfortunate last name.
Brave guy, though, I'll tell you that. Really brave guy.
Yeah. And that's and it's funny because I was in a group chat with a bunch of guys who were talking about, paganism, and they were like, maybe it would have gone a lot better if Christianity hadn't come in and told all these pagan cultures that and slayed their serpent killing god. I'm like, oh, like, let me get my Bible, because I'm pretty sure we've got one of those serpent killing gods. You know what I mean? And so it's like it's a
Leviathan is mentioned in the Bible as
but
well,
I mean, that's the whole thing. Like, God, like, Satan is the serpent. Like, that's what God's doing, slaying the serpent, right? So it's like it's a recapitulation of all these fundamental themes of reality. It's almost like these mythologies have a share of common grace, because they're all looking at the same reality. Maybe they're not interpreting it correctly, or maybe they don't have all the pieces of it, because there is.
They have far less low resolution. Some of them even, twisted sometimes pictures of the truth. But I believe that all of these have been attempts to move towards truth. That they've all been attempts to realize a good life, and then we just are often misguided, and we still are misguided. If we think we're doing better today, then our forefathers were probably even more likely misguided.
Mm-hmm. Well, then, so then this road can lead to one of two different destinations. You can have the perennial philosophy Aldous Huxley route, where it's like, they're all different pieces of the truth, right? Like that we have to syncretize all of them into one larger truth, versus they're all they're all pieces of Christianity in like scattered around the world, right? Because that's two different modes. Like we have to synthesize all these and find their Venn diagram overlapping to establish some larger religion that we all then get to participate in. That's the perennial philosophy, versus all these world religions have pieces of Christianity in them. And those are those two different paths. And I think a lot of people have a lot of trouble with the idea that, are we really going to go to China and India and be like, Christ is the way? And I can speak to that, by the way. But it almost seems incompatible with we might say the Eastern mind that we impose the Western way of being onto them, right? Or our Christian way of being. Maybe Western's not the right word.
Christianity, the fastest growing religion in China at the
Yeah,
moment.
it's a whole thing.
Even though it's like severely oppressed by the state, like it's exploding there, right? So I really think that, Christianity is incredibly plastic. It's very, very plastic and very adaptable, and it fits in to all of the world mythologies. So Jonathan Pisher and Richard Rowland are busy doing a series called Universal History. They've done like 10 episodes so far, but they're just basically piecing together universal history of the world, how everything fits together, and it's all centered around Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything ties into this, and there is a story that brings together all the people of the world, and that story is centered around Christ. So the problem with Aldous Huxley's idea is that you imagine that you can stand nowhere and then construct a belief system. But the fact is, you have to be standing within somewhere to construct that belief system. And so you can't. Where you're standing will determine what you see. And so what we believe is that if you're standing within Christianity, you see the truth, you see reality the way it is, and you can't say, well, I'm going to stand outside of all of the belief systems, and then I'm going to tell you the way reality is, because then you're just standing in a belief system which is called postmodernism or nominalism or something like that, or just like probably more likely consumer individualism is your kind of cosmology,
or Satanism, right? And you just don't know
whatever it is. Or you just have no idea. That's the most dangerous. You don't know. If you think you're neutral, that means that you've just been captured by the culture. That means the culture has you. And so whatever it is, have you noticed how many people, when they want to have some wisdom, they quote Hollywood movies, and often the bad ones, like really bad, like Tropical Thunder is what I got quoted to me last. What? I'm like, it's like, never go full retard. It's like
I really hope someone isn't quoting it as wisdom. This is my wisdom literature.
That people, it's amazing how people like, oh yeah, did you see that? That made me think of when that guy said the thing. Like we have no idea what wisdom means anymore, but it is the stars that give us wisdom always, right? Stars. Where's Sophia lives? Yeah.
Who's Sophia?
Sophia is the Greek word for wisdom. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
no, you know that.
This sort of non way of being. It makes me think of an anecdote that I think I heard in a YouTube video. And no, this is from another Christian apologist, because that's basically all I listen to all day is like Christian apologetics. And so, so this pastor was saying God and an atheist get together and they try to make man. And so God takes dirt, shapes it in the shape of a man, and breathes life into him, but voila, there's a man. And then the atheist takes all the dirt and runs a bunch of chemical reactions and runs an electric charge into it and creates some sort of homunculus kind of version of a man. And then God goes, no, you have to get your own dirt. Right?
Yeah. So what's really a lot in the culture at the moment right now is this thing of transhumanism, where I think we're trying to, I mean, there's a transhumanist manifesto. I read it. It's super scary. It's really, really
Yeah.
scary. But these people, they believe that, like, human life is to be transcended. And so what I kind of detect in it is this kind of like hygienic disgust at the messiness of
Yeah.
humanness. And then also fear of death is obviously even further down. It's a fundamental fear of dying. And so it's an attempt to make themselves immortal and thereby become God. And I read Ian M. Banks, who is a fantastic
Hmm.
science fiction author when I grew up, and he has these minds, which are like these, often in ships that has a mind, and are like, ultra, 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 super advanced
Hmm.
AIs. Um, and it's such a tempting story. And yeah, I mean, I have no idea what's happening with AI right now, but it's definitely, we're creating like a god.
Trying.
I mean, no, we have created a god. The internet is the god
Mhm.
already, right? For most people, you can't even have a conversation anymore without bringing Google into the conversation, because if you try and notice this, try and have a conversation with people and you're not allowed to look at your phone at any time during the conversation. It's really, really
Mm.
difficult, because people want to take out their phones and look stuff up anytime there's like anything that's just a little bit uncertain. If I feel unsafe about something, and I get an answer from Google, then I know what the truth is. And what I've just found is I've made agreements with my family and people that are close to me that we're not allowed to look up stuff on our phones and ask Google when we don't know something. And the richness and the depth of conversations that we've had based on that has been amazing. Been amazing, because we haven't this fetishized God, all knowledge machine that's telling us all the answers all
Mhm.
the time.
It makes me think about what you're saying about the woman in your small town who tells stories. Like maybe maybe conversation, we conceptualize conversation now as sharing information, whereas maybe there's a way to think of conversation as the sharing of stories, and the dialogue doesn't take place through things that are necessarily like factual in some objective, quote unquote, scientific sense, but we share deeper truths through stories, which can't be captured in facts.
Yeah, yeah. I'm still trying to learn about storytelling. I still don't know if I have. I think I think that the story of Christ does max out all the
Hmm.
categories of story. I think just understanding that better, and how it's kind of resonated in all kinds of different settings and patterns everywhere. I think that's a really powerful. I regularly hear someone saying like, "Oh yeah, I heard like this non-Christian guy or Jordan Peterson or whatever talking about the Bible, and I'd never ever experienced Christianity that way. It was just like mind blowing the way it was." And at a gathering I had at a men's group circle recently, I kind of told a little story about the way I saw like the cosmic story of Christianity. Not as like Jesus Christ came to save
Hmm.
your sins, but more like how there was this cosmic battle throughout all time, and how that was like a victory of trampling death by
Hmm.
death is the terms that the Orthodox use. Um, and the guys were just I spoke for like 3 minutes, and after that, this group of guys are just like staring at me like,
Hmm.
wow, like I've never ever ever heard of Christianity in that way before. They were totally blown away by it. And so it's like we've just kind of got used to that. We think we know the Christian story, we think we understand it, and therefore we kind of turn off. But when you actually, and this is why men's groups are great, is like you start listening to stuff that people are sharing, even though you think you know it already. And what happens is we get our minds blown, because we actually know very, very little.
Hmm. And
Don't even know what we don't know. This was what Socrates said, right? He he was wise because he knew what he didn't know.
he knew the extent to what he didn't know, which was everything, right? I know nothing, right? Which means I don't know. Yeah. And the telling of it's funny because a friend of mine just went on a men's retreat. Not all like the kind of inner work that we're talking about, but for veterans and first responders. And he was telling me about it, and just the amount of storytelling that takes place. That men are actually like like that men are forced into a position of having to tell their story when most men don't
Mm,
actually. They've never met. They've never really thought about it. They've never conceived of their lives, and this is unusual to me because this is not how I think, because I think of my life in
mm,
terms of a story. Like I can trace the narrative of it because I made that choice years ago to think of my life in terms of story. But it's baffling to
mhm,
me that some men, they don't think of their own lives in terms of story. They don't think of their families' lives or their friends or their wives or even human history in terms of a story. And then it sort of strikes me that, just thinking about this right now, that we live inside a bunch of different stories that we don't know how to question, and that we're not allowed to question. Like you talked about transhumanism. Like transhumanism is a story and the story is, we've started in these gross biological kind of machines that are limited and decay and die, and it's just that's the cocoon that humanity, or some section of humanity, is going to be born out of, into pure consciousness in the machine. That's the transhumanist story, right? Or the social justice story, which is that we've come from patriarchal white Western oppression, and this is a transition phase into, more quote unquote democratic kind of rule, where, we put down the white man forever or whatever. But there's also the non-story, which is the efficiency story. Like, I'm just here to get better at what I do, and in the moment, and I will have achieved some apotheosis if I can maximize the efficiency in my day. That's also a story. It's a non-story. And then there's the Christian story, right? Which I would like to hear you articulate, actually, because I think there's all the different ways of looking at it. But I like the idea, and my friend Cameron, I'll see if I can dig it up. He's got. I'm going to send it to you too. It's a meme of these knights fighting in this like round table, kind of like Renaissance fair, and these two knights are fighting, and one knight is hitting the other knight. It says Christ, and that's the knight that's standing up, and he's holding a chair, a folding chair, proper Renaissance fair, that says death, and the other knight on the ground that he's about to hit with the chair is death. It's a great meme. I'm going to send it to you. You love memes.
Yeah, I hate memes. like I hate it all. Yeah, go first.
You're gonna get so many memes. It's not even.
Yeah, I almost hate them as much as I hate getting long voice messages that have no information in it, but just someone bumbling confusion.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I'm definitely going to send you both of those.
Yeah.
Well, so the Christian story is the one that I think is coming into being through the hearts of men and women, but it's sort of being, is it being reborn? And this is the fun joke that I kick around. Like, Nietzsche said God is dead, but the God he happened to be talking about died and rose after 3 days, right? So is there? I think there's a rising going on now of this Christian story being born, reborn under the earth. I don't know what the right word is, but that story, I think, has a lot of compelling aspects to it for things that men are searching for.
Yeah. Well, I definitely saw, like, there's someone who like had a graffiti, God is dead, Nietzsche, and then underneath someone else wrote, Nietzsche is dead, right. God. So it's like, yeah, I mean, God dies to people who want to kill him, but he's alive for me. And it's the most incredibly obvious thing in the world for me that of course there is a God. And I have, I'm a very, very scientific, very logical, very rational human being. And all the New Age stuff was like always like woo, but this stuff is, but like, so the original Christians were accused of atheism, actually, because Christianity. So in that letter, actually, Saint Justin Martyr wrote to the Roman Emperor. That's where he refuted this idea that we're not atheists, but everybody called them atheists as well, because Christianity, it's such a founded base religion in reality, and it's very clear. There's just reality happens to be quite a much more beautiful and mysterious than what it is. Science is starting to find out how incredibly mysterious reality is. When you start looking at quantum, and it's just like all we just find is like the seething chaos of particles and waves and who knows what, right? So it's like science is starting to grasp this, but Christianity's always understood that this is the nature of reality. And so what the core of reality is story. That's what it is. Reality is there's nothing outside of story. Like, we can't make sense of anything. There's no meaning outside of story. To make any sense whatsoever of anything, you have to tell a story about it. Otherwise, you don't know what to focus on. You don't know where to put your attention. And so, the story of Christianity is the meaning of heaven and earth, and in a very deep and fundamental way. Is that the heaven is that which comes from above. It's the information. It's the blueprint, and the earth is the chaos of potential, and those things meeting is the core mystery of civilization is how they meet at the cross,
Mm.
right? So my understanding of the story of Christ is that Christ is the highest of the high and the lowest of the low
Mm.
that brought together, and that it is that that principle that it is a principle of love that unites everything, and um it's also like a cosmic war
Mhm.
that's waged for all time, which and the war is really, if you want to concretize it in our lives, then it's us fighting against
Mm.
ourselves. So God created us in His likeness and image, but He gave us free will, and so there's a part of us that is drawn towards death and destruction, and it's a very very powerful and strong part of us. And then there's another part of us that is drawn towards God to become one with Him. So and so this is what theosis is. Theosis is the process of becoming one with God, and that's a beautiful and amazing thing that I think I've wasted way too much of my life to ever make any significant progress with. Um, but I think that yeah, the things that we focus our time and attention on will, a lot of us either draw us downwards or will help us, will be lifted, and the path towards it is often the opposite of what we think it is. There's an aspect of humility that's needed, I think, to be able to step onto that path. The entrance to the kingdom of heaven is through
Mm.
repentance. That's where I get to grow and learn.
Mhm.
And a good place to do it is in a marriage. That's what I found. There's two main paths you can. I believe that there's a path of the monk, who dedicates his life fully to dedicated to only seeking God's God's will in
Mhm.
his life, giving up his own will completely and all possessions. And then I think the other one that really works is
Mhm.
marriage. And I think that there's something about joining your life with a woman,
Mhm.
uh, and then learning to love her, really love her, uh, and giving your life for her, that will redeem your soul.
Mm. There's a book that someone gave me. I've got it around here somewhere. It's like Gary Thomas, and it's called Sacred Marriage. Oh, and Kenny gave it to me, and it was a really it's a really precious gift that I really resonate with. I don't even like that I use that term just now, but that I really connected with. One of the messages of the book is that what if marriage wasn't designed to make us happy, but to make us holy, right? And it's a question that's very uncomfortably asked because I grew up, in a culture and in a climate where marriage was a death sentence, right? And I mean,
Mm.
especially living in San Francisco, marriage is the death of all your Peter Pan dreams, right? And it's the
Yeah,
death of
yeah, yeah. It is a death
yeah.
sentence. Yeah, I have an interesting story to tell about that.
Mm. Go.
So the Orthodox marriage service, you wear a martyr's crown. So
Hmm.
it's literally a death ritual where you die, as baptism is also, but this is a martyr. So martyr is a witness, and so it's a willing choice you take to die in order for something new to be born. So the center of the Western marriage ceremony is the exchanging of the vows. You say "I do," and that's why it's a legal thing. It's seen as a legal state organized institutionalized agreement that two people enter into, so that you can kind of control the household to be an efficient unit. But the original Christian marriage was a martyr, and so we put on crowns as martyrs, um, and so you die. That's the whole focus of the ritual, and there's no point where you say you do in the marriage ceremony. Actually, you say it when you get betrothed. Um, but in the marriage, you're bound together with a rope around your wrists, and then they put a martyr's crown on your head, because then something new is born
Hmm.
after that. Of course, it's born after that, but it also continues to be born over a long period of time, more and more, as you grow together.
This is both the husband.
That blew my mind when
It's
I heard
blowing
it.
my mind right now. This is something that the husband and wife both do, wear the martyr's crown, or just the husband. That's
But
beautiful. That's beautiful.
really something special. And I'm wondering, like, why did we stop doing that?
I
Why did we stop doing
I mean, probably for many reasons, one of which I would imagine has to do with people's actual fear of death, right? Like, and this is like the strange thing. Like, we live in this culture of death that is at the same time terrified of death, right?
and rejects it and lives it if it's not
I
happening, and
wonder.
tries to get away from it.
So okay, so one of the things you've said many things in this conversation that blow my mind. You want to said is we live in the head and we're obsessed with the body. So I wonder if that parallels. I think it probably does, where the body dies and we live in the head, and so we have this culture of death, and yet we're afraid of death. If you unify the head, the abstract ideal, to the body, which dies, then there's a death that happens in that, and then you get more comfortable with death. And as you get more comfortable with death, you can participate in death and you can live a fuller life.
Yeah, and the fundamental pattern is very easily seen through the sowing of a
Hmm.
seed. And so, the seed falls into the ground, it dies, and then it brings forth much fruit. So this is the pattern of death, burial, and resurrection is a fundamental pattern in reality and for all life as well. So something to bring forth life, something needs to
Hmm.
die. And by dying, it's able to rise again. And so this is how Christ willingly gave himself over to be killed by the strongest empire that had ever existed, and
Hmm.
thereby conquered it.
Hmm.
It took 350 years or so, but he actually conquered it by dying, by being killed by it. So we thought that death was the final defeat, but
Hmm.
actually it's actually the victory. Death is the
Hmm.
victory. So if Christianity is going to really have a revival, Will, that's the one question you asked. I believe there will be
Hmm.
martyrs, and in some ways there are martyrs now already. Like we're seeing not proper full martyrdom, but we're seeing something, like lynch mobs and kind of a lot of public hate often being put at people who will take up Christian perspectives, and especially so there's a small amount of them. I just read there's a guy called Saint Paisios who was a very recent saint living in Greece, who said something that really inspired me. He said, if you feel joy at the contempt of other people because of your love for Christ,
Hmm.
that you could suffer for Christ, then you have a small idea of what martyrdom is
Hmm.
about. And I got to say, that's far beyond me. That's beyond my spiritual abilities. I hate being, you know, ridiculed publicly. I can't stand it. It's very, very difficult for me to handle that kind of
Hmm.
thing. So I think we need a lot of strength and we need a lot of strong fellowship as men if we're going to stand in the times that are coming now, because it's a strong wave that's running across the culture right now. And a lot of stuff, like it's like there is a kind of re-enchantment that's happening to reality in many ways, and all kinds of weird and wonderful stuff are coming out now, in the conspiracy theories, but just like, lots of weird stuff is coming out. So I think that we're gonna have to really stand strong as men together, and there's going to be a testing, and so I'm really understanding like this idea of like just building brothers that I know and that I trust, and I can also be in hard. When we do our gatherings in Maniphesto, we make life really uncomfortable for these guys. We really
Hmm.
test them hard, and then we see some guys who just like break down and start complaining
Hmm.
and can't handle any pressure, and then we see most of the guys, they love it.
Hmm.
They love it. They love being pressed, and that's because they feel that something's wrong, and so this this death brings you back into contact with reality, right? Death is the ultimate reality for most of us. That's when we'll face ourselves. That's where we'll face everything that we've ever done. And so pain is a little taste of death. And so when we're able to go through pain together with a group of brothers and discomfort with a group of brothers, we're experiencing a little bit of that. And we experience like that's the source of life. That's the story that Christ presented to us, right? It's like death is it brings forth much fruit.
Hmm. So can you share some of the ways you put men through this? I know that some of these practices are secret, and I do mean secret, not necessarily private, and that some aren't. But I mean, it's a thing. Like, how do you? This is what I say about initiation. I don't know if you run an initiation, but this is what I took.
We call it initiation into leadership.
Good.
That's what
Okay.
we do.
So
Leadership
so
initiation.
my whole thing with initiation is it has to be something that you can fail at, right? Because in the old classic
Mhm.
style of initiation, men would take boys into the forest or the desert, and they would be put through a series of trials, and survival meant that you're a man. Like it was literally life and death, right? We're gonna bury you up to your head, and the ants are gonna come, and you're either gonna survive through the night or not. What are they? Like, barbaric by contemporary standards, but that was needed to ensure survival. Like you have to control yourself as a man and get through this because that's what men do, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so nowadays you can't put men into an initiation where they're probably going to die. No one's going to sign up for that, right? But you have to put them into a scenario that they can fail at. You can't carry them across the
Yeah.
finish line. So that
Yeah.
shows up for you.
Yeah. 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 So I mean, I think the most truthful way of saying this, and I mean, I don't. So the question for me is more like, should I tell them that they failed or not?
Mm.
Because lots of men fail. So I would say 2 men have passed my initiation so far out of the hundreds, like hundreds and hundreds that I've taken it. 2 men have
Wow.
passed, um, uh, and they kind of know it that they really got it,
Okay.
and that they actually did the right thing. Um, but all the other guys failed. Yeah,
Do they
absolutely.
know they failed?
They only took a partial step at least. So I didn't tell them that
Mm.
they failed though. That's the only thing. So I'm probably cutting corners there. Maybe I need to. I mean, it's kind of a good thing to put out there then and say like, hey guys, come to my initiation training, my leadership initiation. Only 2 people have ever passed it. Men have had massively transformational and very very insightful, or powerful insights through the event. So but yeah, the only two really passed,
Mm.
and the rest just weren't ready yet.
And that's a good way of framing it. And if it's a leadership initiation, I was explaining this to Issa Ryan on Instagram. She's rad, by the way. Um, it was that not all men are actually called to leadership. Like as Christian men, we're all called to lead our homes. That's non-negotiable. So you must lead in that regard. But in the wider community of men, not all men are actually called to leadership. Many just want to belong, right? We have in America anyway, we have this whole judgment around like leader versus follower, which is really unfortunate, and alpha versus
Mhm.
beta, which is also really unfortunate. But the
Mhm.
reality is that some men really just want to follow a noble leader and don't have it in them to be the leader, and that's okay. And that's a
Mhm.
really at least in the American psyche, that's something that a lot of men really struggle with because we all have to be leader, king, alpha of everything, or if you're not, you're just this weak beta.
Well, here it's even
Oh,
worse. Here it's like just the word leader triggers a whole lot of people. So it's like they refuse. Everybody's like, no, there's no leader. We just
oh,
collaborate. It's like why? Like collaboration cannot work without leadership. Leadership can't work without collaboration. These two things, like there's no such thing as no leadership, right? But that's just something that's stuck in some people's head. Yeah.
so
So
when okay, so walk me through just really quickly, like when leadership is called for European men, like what happens? Because I have my own ideas about what's going on there, but like what's kind of happening in that? Like, why do men freak out around that?
well, people will think it means domination
Yeah,
and tyranny. That's what if there's men involved. If there's women involved, then it's like yay, yay,
you froze,
leadership,
but you,
great. But as soon as there's a man, then there's a John Vervaeke and Jordan Peterson talk a lot about the hermeneutics of suspicion. That's what really drives the response to anything that with leadership involving men. Uh,
wow. They're suspicious that any man taking on any leadership role will become this domineering kind of tyrant instead of having a vision of like healthy leadership.
the moment you talk about it explicitly, if you pretend it's not leadership, then no one will mind. And if there's a film actor involved, then it's great. Or other mainstream, public personalities like television personalities, and especially if it's like a bit of a naughty boy, who's kind of like a little bit cheeky and kind of sexually provocative or something like that. And then it's all fine. But you should never talk about it explicitly. Like he should preferably distance himself from any kind of, he should just drop the word toxic masculinity once in a while and stuff like that, and talk about patriarchy once in a while, and that kind of then leadership is fine. And a lot of the stars, but like it's weird because Me Too then flipped that radically as well, right? So the richest guy in Denmark some years ago was the guy who made all his money in the travel branch. His name was Simon Spies. And he had very, very manipulative sexual habits with lots and lots and lots of young women. But this was very well known in the population, and there was, it's documented, and it was just public part of his personality. Everyone thought it was very colorful and interesting and stuff like that. But now, Me Too suddenly, just like 2 weeks ago, then everything is like exploded, and now he's like getting totally, everything about him is just like evil and bad. But just a month ago, he was fantastic, and everybody loved him. So it's weird because the guy died like 20 years ago, right? But now they're suddenly taking it upon themselves to wreck his reputation. Even though he's not even alive anymore. So it's weird. Like the guy was a dirty sleazebag. Obviously, he's a terrible sleazebag. But he was also a hero in the Danish population, and now it's opposite. It's really strange.
And that seems to be the case, that when you have leadership, backwards leadership, like, oh, as long as the guy pretends he's not the leader and can, have some plausible deniability to his leadership. I never actually said I was a leader. The guys just followed, but I never actually said. They never stepped into that role, and that allows behind the scenes to all this toxicity going on, all this genuinely destructive behavior, because he's not actually the leader, and as not actually the leader, we can't actually hold him to account. So he doesn't actually have to be accountable. It's like, no, you have to. This leadership is this giant wound that exists in Europe very clearly, and it's been there for a while, and I know why it was there, and it's that wound is poked weekly, so that European, we can talk about it, maybe we'll talk about it offline, but so European men don't actually stand up for themselves because they get called a really naughty bad name, and all the boys like, I don't want to be the naughty bad boy. And here in America, they use the same thing here, and all of us are like, yes, deal with it, right? And so
yeah.
It's really
yeah. Well, I really respect that about, and it's a source of invigoration and inspiration for me that American guys are just like, yes, that's us. We're doing it. It's you don't have that same thing, and it doesn't work. And like in the US, you can still get like, there's a masculine like kind of spark in the culture very much so. Whereas here, it's really been like, as soon as it pops up, like there's like 10 people waiting to whack it as hard as they can. Good.
Well,
I think I'm getting to the end of this one. So how about we bring things out to a close?
Let's do it. Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate that we brought it all the way back around to kind of the things that the old world and the new world have to learn from each other. Because that's my belief, is that we have things to teach each other. And neither the new world nor the old world is default correct. But they're both teachers of different perspectives. So I'm glad we came back around to that.
And I'm really happy that I got to rant a lot on your channel.
I want you to rant
let out some stuff that I haven't done before.
I want you to rant more, so maybe we'll do a live stream and I'll give you another opportunity, because I really appreciated that. I really appreciated that.
This was really fun, Will, and I got a lot of value out of it. So
thank you, Paul. Where can men go to find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah, Maniphesto with PH instead of F, maniphesto.com. We're having a retreat called The Journey Towards Death this October. And then our main leadership initiation is called The Death of the Patriarchs. That's happening in May next year.
Sounds awesome. If I can make that, maybe I'll make.
Yeah, and I also do some coaching for the space moment as well. If there are people who want, my coaching is either like vision work, helping to get a vision of where you want to go, or goal attainment, realizing the vision. And then I'm also working with, I have a system for taking leadership in your own family, in your own home, with your own wife. I've worked through adapting a whole lot of different tools for doing that myself, and about creating a shared vision for you and your partner, and then working through a structure to be able to land it. And it's not about like getting what you want. It's about helping your wife and you and your family as a whole to live the kind of life that you want to be living.
That's beautiful. You have a podcast also, right?
Yeah. It's called Maniphesto Conversations on Masculinity, and you can find it on YouTube and all the other Spotify.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Paul. This has been great, and I appreciate all your rants.
Thanks, Will. And thanks for all the work you're doing. Fighting.